Oh, five. All five. Yeah, this is what we agree. Important, tu étais, comme tu n'étais pas à la réunion de service.
Please be seated. Please take your seats. Please be seated. Good morning to all of you. The sitting is open. This morning, the agenda calls for the election of 3 judges to the European Court of Human Rights in respect of the Czech Republic, the Republic of Moldova, and the Russian Federation. A list of candidates and biographical notices are to be found in documents 15358, 15350, 15304, and 15375, Addendum 2. The voting for each election will take place by individual electronic secret ballot, voting between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. today. so between 10 and 3. Each political group has appointed a teller according to the rules. The tellers are for EPP, Mr. Vlasenko, for SOC, Mr. Schenach, for ALDE, De Bruin-Wezeman, for EC, Ribolla, for UAL, Gavin. I will announce the result of the elections at the afternoon's sitting. For these first ballots, an absolute majority of the vote is required. If a second round has to be organized, it will take place tomorrow morning. I hope I was clear. So then I now declare the ballots open. The next item of business this morning is the address by Stella Kyriakides, European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety. Yes, sir.
The mechanism for voting. Some people are not yet clear about how we do it. Could you or could Despina, someone explain it fully to us?
No problem. Despina?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, President. It will be conducted by Skytel electronically, as the elections of high officials in January and the judges' elections since January take place. No difference. Thank you very much. And please, we will be sending reminders. It's important that our judges are elected with an important participation to ensure their legitimacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Despina. Let me now warmly welcome our former colleague, friend, and above all, President of this Assembly, now the European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, Stella Kyriakides. We're kind of proud to have you here because, I mean, having a former president now in the European Commission, it has some people dreaming, by the way. You never know. I wasn't talking about myself. The Parliamentary Assembly, of course, fully supports your work and priorities within the European Union, making life better for patients and consumers across Europe. We are grateful to have you back here in this chamber that you know so well, and that, as you know, this chamber basically represents the beating heart, as they say, of European democracy. And our colleagues, Commissioner Kyriakides has spent her life working on matters related to health and well-being, not to mention her never-ending endeavor against breast cancer, which still serves as an inspiration to all of us, as we, by the way, have seen last night together. Now, your commitment, Madam Commissioner, is also a testament to the fact that progress and change is possible, because you do acknowledge that. Treatment, research, and awareness of cancer have all come a long way since your engagements. Therefore, if there is one takeaway for us members of Parliament from your work, it is that we should never stop championing for what we truly believe in. Yesterday I put the Hamlet-like question, to lead or not to lead, and basically the answer is yes, we should lead, and this is exactly what you are doing in your capacity. Finally, let me recall that after being elected President of our Assembly in 2017, now Commissioner Kyriakides' first official trip was to a seminar in London about children's mental health and child-friendly justice. This truly illustrates her passion, your passion, Stella, and priorities, putting the most vulnerable and those in need first. Stella, if you allow me to say, Stella, thank you again for being with us. And without any further delay, I am extremely proud and happy to yield the floor to you.
Dear President, Madam Secretary General of the Assembly, Assembly members, colleagues, friends, I'm truly delighted to be among you today again and would like to sincerely thank President Ims for his kind invitation. Not so long ago, I had the honor of serving as President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I cannot but recall the excellent cooperation I had from various posts I served in this Assembly, and as head of the Cyprus delegation, with colleagues across political groups and national delegations, with experts and NGOs, with ordinary citizens. And I take this opportunity to thank you again for the partnerships we built to fight common causes, always having as an ultimate goal to serve democracy, human rights and the rule of law in the name of European citizens, for the protection and respect of our children with the 1 in 5 campaign, for the protection of women against violence or LGBTQI rights, for the rights of vulnerable groups, the disabled, the Roma community, for access to health, to education, to social care, for the fighting of corruption, for the promotion of transparency and equity, for the promotion of justice, always aiming to make the voices of the citizens of the 47 member states of this pan-European organization heard loud and clear, and that their inalienable human rights are protected. We need this House to be their voices. It is indeed a privilege to be serving from any post in this organization. President, Secretary General, colleagues, I must admit that today feels a little bit like coming home. Now, as European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, I know that I'm here among many friends. I'm very glad to know that tomorrow's plenary sitting will focus on the right to a safe, healthy and sustainable environment. I'm sure that the discussions you will be having tomorrow will reflect the action we need to be taking together today. The health of our planet and the health of our citizens is a continuum, something I will never get tired of repeating. Plant health, animal health, and human health are inseparable. Our One Health approach to policymaking in this area is an unshakable principle in our work. Since the outbreak of the global COVID-19 pandemic, our lives have dramatically changed. The loss of thousands of lives being the darkest page of this unprecedented crisis. Each and every one of them a tragedy. A human story of loss that cannot be subsumed in statistics. A public health crisis that has shown us in the starkest terms that we need to be better prepared for cross-border health threats and able to respond adequately to them. In fighting the pandemic, we have learned, first and foremost, that working together offers us the best, indeed I would say the only, chance of securing a healthier future for us, for the next generation and for our planet. Cooperation and solidarity are really the only way forward. The Council of Europe could not, of course, be absent in these tremendously huge efforts to combat this unprecedented public health crisis. It responded immediately to this immense challenge and offered all possible guidance and support to the citizens of its 47 member states. We are grateful for that. Furthermore, this Assembly, vibrant and active as always, discussed and took positions on a number of important issues in relation to the pandemic. Honourable members, to see cooperation at its most powerful, we need to look no further than the remarkable way in which the world's scientists have come together to deliver safe and effective vaccines. Similarly, the EU's vaccine strategy has shown European collaboration and solidarity at its finest. A historic initiative for Europe and a massive leap forward for European cooperation. 2 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for the EU to be purchasing vaccines in order to get its member states out of a public health crisis. Yet, European unity and solidarity meant that we could have vaccines produced and delivered as quickly and as safely as possible. Working with and on behalf of our member states, we have now obtained the biggest and most diverse portfolio of vaccines in the world. We gave our member states access to vaccines fairly, equally, and simultaneously to all. We have met our summer target of fully vaccinating 70% of European adults. Dear friends, vaccines do save lives and protect healthcare systems. They offer people hope and they offer people predictability. Yet we all know too well that no one is safe in a pandemic until everyone is safe. This is why vaccinating in the EU alone is not enough. For us, universal and fair access to COVID-19 vaccines and treatments is both a top priority but also a moral imperative. So far, the EU, its member states, and financial institutions working together as Team Europe have mobilized over 40 billion euro for partner countries' efforts to fight COVID-19. The EU has been leading by example, exporting around half of its vaccine production. In all, we have sent more than 700 million doses to over 130 countries. We have helped spearhead the global vaccine rollout with over 3 billion euro in support of the COVAX initiative to ensure equitable vaccine access. Team Europe is already committed to donating 250 million doses by the end of the year. And in her recent State of the Union address, President von der Leyen pledged a further 200 million doses by the middle of 2022. The EU is working tirelessly for global cooperation and solidarity. Looking ahead, we have to make sure that the World Health Organization is reformed, that the World Health Organization is strengthened in order to play its critical lead role in making the world safer against future pandemics. We strongly believe that international cooperation through a binding international agreement on pandemics has an important role to play in combating serious cross-border health threats at national, regional, and international level, and can move us towards a more robust and global health architecture. The Council of Europe can and should put its moral authority behind this global effort and support all the efforts that we are making to have an agreement, a global agreement on pandemics. It can promote better national, regional, and international preparedness and response, stronger health systems, and offer predictable funding, especially for lower and middle-income countries. Cooperation and solidarity also underpin our bold action to deliver a post-COVID recovery that makes Europe healthier, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable. That includes building a strong European health union, another paradigm shift initiative in this past year in the area of health. We are going to be pressing ahead with three key proposals, designed to, firstly, strengthen the European Medicines Agency, and secondly, give the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, ECDC, a broader mandate, and thirdly, address serious cross-border health threats. But the fourth, and arguably the most daring initiative, was proposed last week. A new European Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, called HERA, will be another vital element in our health union. Learning from the structural gaps that the pandemic has revealed, HERA will help anticipate serious cross-border threats to health and identify effective responses. This is going to enable the EU and its member states to rapidly deploy the most advanced medical countermeasures in the event of a health emergency. Our work is to better protect our citizens' health, and it's about fairness, especially in the areas of healthcare access. COVID-19 has, of course, impacted healthcare access. Patients have had important, potentially life-saving treatments for other diseases postponed or cancelled. Diseases such as cancer. Having had cancer myself, I know what a worrying time this is for patients and their loved ones. The last thing they need is a delay in their diagnosis and care. What we will need in future crises is coordination and effective partnerships, support for vulnerable groups, and contingency planning for continuity of care. And this is where Europe's Beating Cancer Plan comes in, to address all these. Drafting the plan has been one of my priorities, a collaborative effort undertaken with all the member states, citizens and stakeholders. Now we need their cooperation to make its goals, flagship initiatives and actions a success. An implementation roadmap will soon be made public. And thanks to the Cancer Plan, we can now step up our efforts on cancer prevention and care and urgently address backlogs and shortages, because we know that together we will change the cancer realities. Mr. President, dear friends, former colleagues, together we're all working in solidarity to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. This will stand us in good stead in our ongoing efforts to build cooperation and solidarity in the service of global health and the Sustainable Development Goals. And today, as I stand before you, I know we all share the same vision and determination to work towards building a better future, a future in health that will leave no one behind, a future where our guiding beacon will be only those foundations that this organization was built upon, foundations that we can all strengthen together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Stella, for your inspiring address. I remind colleagues, because we go into the so-called Q&A that you know so well, having presided over this assembly, let me remind colleagues that you should be asking one single question and not making speeches. And on top of that, the speaker's limit is 1 minute. So, let's head off with the delegates from the political groups. Let me remind you that you have 1 minute. The way we tackle this is we will have the 5 representatives having their question, and after 5 questions we will invite the Commissioner to respond, after which we will take the next 5 and we'll see within the timing how far we can get. The speakers on behalf of the political groups are Céline Beuke as first, Leite Ramos as second, Fiona O'Loughlin as third, Dimitro Natalouka as fourth, and George Katrugalos as fifth. Let me head off by giving the floor to, Mr. Schenag, I see it is. Mr. Schenag is here. We thought you were lost somewhere in the Strasbourg space.
I'm here.
But now I see you, so you have the floor, Mr. Schenag.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Commissioner, dear Stella, I had the feeling it was always to see you with us, and I congratulate you in the name of my group for your extraordinary work. I have 2 questions. we have the situation that in a lot of European countries, people are not willing to have their vaccination, and the gap between those who had the vaccination and those who will not do is growing deeper and deeper, and this is not good for a society. What are your strategies? And the second is, on the other side, poor people in developing countries or in poorer countries, they want to have vaccination and they did not get it. So I know there are programs, maybe you can tell us, and my compliment for your holistic approach to health.
Next on my list is Luis Leite-Ramos. Luis, I suppose you're in the room. Vous avez la parole. Il est où, Luis?
You have normally this seat there.
I will... Louis, where is Louis? Ah, Louis, je ne t'avais pas vu. Désolé, j'étais un peu à l'extrémité là, à ma gauche. Vous avez la parole.
Monsieur le Président, Madame la Commissaire européenne, mes chers collègues, tout d'abord, permettez-moi, au nom du PPE, de féliciter Stella Kyriakides par la campagne de vaccination au sein de l'Union européenne. Comme elle a dit, l'objectif c'était 70%, on est déjà à 73%. On a commis beaucoup d'erreurs, comme la présidente de la Commission l'a reconnu, et on a aussi des questions importantes. Une de ces questions très importantes a à voir avec la harmonisation européenne concernant le pass sanitaire, car les pratiques sont très différentes selon les pays. Pourriez-vous nous apporter des précisions sur ce sujet? On l'a vécu au sein de cette Assemblée parlementaire, les difficultés que certaines délégations ont eues pour venir nous joindre pendant cette session. Une autre, c'est la coopération avec les autres pays, notamment au sein du Conseil de l'Europe. Il y a des régions, il y a des pays, notamment dans les Balkans, dans le Caucase, dans l'Ukraine, qui ont bénéficié de l'aide de l'Union européenne, mais qui ont aujourd'hui quelques problèmes. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez faire davantage pour aider ces pays et combattre la pandémie dans ces régions?
Merci.
Merci de votre attention.
Now we move to Madam Fiona O'Loughlin. Fiona, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. And Madam Commissioner, I commend you for your incredible work in vaccines and, of course, in cancer strategy as well. You speak about the voice of the citizen, and I wish to give a voice to those who don't have a voice, neither here nor in their own home countries, sadly, because in many cases their voice is no longer, and it remains to families and others to advocate for them. And I'm talking about people living with dementia or Alzheimer's who have been hugely impacted by the pandemic. And while member countries need to invest heavily in home care strategies and community day services, I believe that at a European level, focus and investment should go into some particular areas, particularly around younger onset dementia supports, dementia research, drug therapies, etc., and of course investment in prevention via dementia-inclusive companies focused on the 9 modifiable risk factors of dementia. And I would like to ask you what you could possibly do to prioritise these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. We now move to Mr. Nataluka. I do not see Mr. Nataluka in the room. Yes, voila. Mr. Nataluka, you have the floor.
Very much. Thank you very much, dear Mr. President, dear Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed deep-rooted weakness in the EU's capacity to act in a health crisis. It undermined the overall sense of European solidarity and cooperation and gave birth to such a phenomenon as vaccine diplomacy. For quite some time, what is officially called a union has been in fact the spread of subjects left to their own devices without anyone to pull them all together and provide a clear plan of action. Today, dear Commissioner, you are the most public and fierce advocate of such a plan, the vaccine strategy that has been launched in June 2021. And I thank you and congratulate you with all your efforts. However, before June 21, and I have no intention to offend you, but you really were not that much public and on the radars. You were not even half as public as you are today. For this reason, again, don't get me wrong, but it might come to someone that in this assembly as a pleasant surprise that Europe actually does have a Commissioner for Health. It does exist. And after such a discovery, one might rightly inquire how you've been doing lately. And most importantly, what have you been doing lately before June 2021 when coronavirus ravaged Europe and vaccines were still scarce. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to George Katrugalos. George, you have the floor.
Madam Commissioner, in January, our Assembly, in echo of proposals of states like South Africa or India, and even ideas of progressive politicians like Alexis Tsipras, has asked the vaccine to be considered a public good and for a waiver of the intellectual property so as to be possible for all citizens, even in the poorest countries, to get vaccinated. United States have accepted this idea, but not the European Union. In another case, in San Marino, we have seen the European Commission not to accept the vaccination of the citizens of this state by Sputnik. Do you think that these positions of the Commission are in line with the message of solidarity that you have conveyed to this room today? And what do you plan to do towards this direction? Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. I now yield the floor to Madam Commissioner for all of these questions, and then we'll move to the next 5 ones. Stella, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for all the questions. There's a great deal that we need to discuss. First of all, I want to come to the question placed and the comment by my colleague, Mr. Shenak. You are absolutely right that we are seeing across the European Union a diversity, and I have already said it, of the rates of vaccinations. We have reached over 73% in the adult population in member states, but this is not for all the member states. But we need to address this gap and we need to address the difficulties, but one size does not fit all. So we cannot have vaccine hesitancy and address it using only one way. We need to, in every country, in every member state, understand the reason why they are having challenges. As you do know, the vaccination programs are competencies of the member state. So we need to address the differences faced in the different member states and support them in every way they need. There needs to be no doubt that the lower we have the vaccination coverage in any country and in any member state, we then have more pressure on the hospital systems and a higher rate of mortality. So the work of the Commission and my work as the Commissioner of Health and Food Safety is to understand the different challenges faced in member states and to support them so that they are able to move forward. I wanted to also say here that it was mentioned that at the beginning a lot of mistakes were made. I would say that we have learned a lot of lessons along the way in an unprecedented health crisis, but we have also always left space for the member states in their national campaigns to use the information that they think fit. And also, we work with them very closely to fight misinformation and disinformation about vaccines. Mr. Leteramas talked about harmonization in the area of health. It's not an option because of the treaties, but I would say this. What we have achieved over the last 18 months was to work with all the member states in order to have joint procurements for vaccines, for medical equipment, for masks. We have managed to move forward with all the member states, and in fact it was the member states themselves that came in and supported the EU vaccine strategy. To clarify, the EU vaccine strategy is the Commission working with and on behalf of member states. And I wanted to just inform you that we now have also an EU therapeutic strategy based on the same concept, where we're building up a broad portfolio of potential therapeutics that member states can have access to through procurement as the moment that they are approved by the European Medicines Agency. And the pillars that we're putting forward for the European Health Union within the treaty, and I stress this because the competences of health are member states, we are well within the treaty, But we are working in order to exhaust and use the treaty as broadly as possible in order to have coordination and cooperation with member states, especially in the area of public health during crisis. There was a question on on dementia. I think that there was a question on dementia. I agree with you that this is a very important area. And it is, COVID seems to have taken over many of the discussions, but I can assure you that we are looking at all the other areas of health at the same time. And the new EU for Health program, this is the first time we have such a large and a big budget for a standalone EU for Health program, will be looking to address the issues that have to do with dementia and other non-communicable diseases. So it is very much, I would say, on our radar, and thank you for raising that. On the issue of raised for intellectual property rights, I think it was raised by Mr. Katrugalos. I have said it in my introductory remarks. From the beginning, it was never about Europe first. And from the beginning, vaccinating the world has been, for us, a priority. We are open to discuss all options and for the production of vaccines, but we don't think that lifting the IP waivers is the way to bring vaccines quickly forward. Europe was never put an export ban in the export of vaccines at a time when production problems were faced. Europe was the continent that exported vaccines throughout and from day one, and exports half of the amount of vaccines it produces. And for us, we continue to work in this way, and we work very closely with companies who have shown that they are active. They can be active when they work closer together. On the issue to do with what we can do in terms of working and with other countries, I just wanted to say that it's important that we mention here the initiative of the digital COVID-19 certificates, which has allowed European citizens to move and travel safely. And I just want to say that here it also, third countries are also able to join and we are working to make sure that these certificates are compatible with systems and countries across the world. I hope that I have covered most of the questions. I can come back. Oh, and there was a question, I think, on Monaco and I think it was Monaco and the recognition of Sputnik. This is San Marino and the recognition of Sputnik. This is the member state, the state that would decide which vaccines they would approve, and San Marino is not. They would approve themselves which vaccines that they would put into their vaccination programs. It's not us.
Thank you. We now move on to our next list of colleagues. I remind all of you, you have exactly 1 minute, and then I will cut your mic in order to give way to as many colleagues as possible. We take it 5 by 5. The next 5 on my list are Alain Milon, Maria Rizzotti, John Howell, Nerea Ahedo, and Zia Altunialdis. So let's start. Commençons avec Alain Milon. Alain, vous avez la parole.
Madame la Commissaire, l'Union européenne s'est engagée donc à participer au mécanisme COVAX. Et vous nous avez dit le nombre de doses qui étaient fournies par l'Union européenne. Ces doses fournies par l'Union viennent-elles en complément des doses fournies par les pays membres? Pouvez-vous nous dire aussi quels sont ces pays tiers? Et enfin, les États recevant gratuitement des vaccins par le biais de ce mécanisme endossent-ils les mêmes responsabilités que les États membres de l'Union, notamment en matière d'indemnisation des personnes qui subiraient un dommage à la suite de la vaccination?
Merci Alain. We now move to Maria Rizzotti. You have the floor.
Grazie Presidente. Nei mesi scorsi l'Autorità Europea per la Sicurezza Alimentare con sede a Parma ha di fatto confermato la corretta battaglia che l'Italia sta facendo in Europa contro il Nutri-Score, che non si basa su un principio scientifico ma su algoritmi, mentre sappiamo che non esistono cibi buoni o cattivi, ma diete equilibrate. Quindi non si avrà il semaforo rosso per prodotti come olio, parmigiano o prosciutto di Parma. Per garantire la sicurezza degli alimenti ai consumatori e salvaguardare il settore agroalimentare, l'Unione Europea e l'Italia hanno adottato la strategia sicurezza dei campi alla tavola. E io penso, in Italia noi abbiamo leggi molto rigide e controlli sulla sicurezza alimentare. Non crede dunque necessario un controllo sulla legislazione degli altri paesi, anche europei, che rischiano non solo di penalizzare produzioni di eccellenza mettendo a repentaglio il marchio del Made in Italy, come si intende intervenire ad esempio su quei paesi che decidono di possessarsi di marchi storici italiani, come è successo clamorosamente con la Croazia, che ha fatto richiesta di utilizzo della parola Prosek per registrare 4 vini a denominazione d'origine protetta, cercando di ingannare per affinità fonetica il consumatore medio europeo proprio per il prosecco italiano? Grazie.
Thank you. We now move on to Mr. John Howell. John, you have the floor. Mic, please, John. Mic. Okay.
It's on now. I'm sure that the pandemic has taken up a lot of your time, but I would too like to ask you a question about the food systems work that you do. And you said earlier that the work you were doing on food systems was to try to make them support the green economy. Can you tell us how you're doing with that, please?
Thank you. We now move on to Ms. Nerea Ahedo. You have the floor. Tiene la palabra.
Gracias. Bien, yo quería entrar en el debate de la tercera dosis mientras gran parte del planeta no ha recibido ni siquiera la primera, pero me llevaría demasiado tiempo. Así que voy a ir a algo más concreto, que es la vacunación en Europa de las personas migrantes en situación irregular y de otros colectivos que quedan fuera del radar de la sanidad pública. Yo vengo del País Vasco y toda persona que reside allí tiene derecho y acceso a la sanidad pública, sea cual sea su situación administrativa, y así todo se ha visto necesario poner en marcha protocolos específicos. Sé que en otros lugares también se han llevado a cabo iniciativas similares, pero no en toda Europa ni con el índice de éxito homogéneo. El objetivo de la vacunación es llegar a toda la población, y no reconocer el derecho a la vacunación o no tener acceso real a la vacuna todas las personas supone mayor riesgo para la salud de todos, y que las tasas de vacunación que se manejan sean inexactas. Nos hablaba usted de un 70%, pero claro, no sé si está incluida esta población invisible. Así que le agradecería si nos pudiera hacer un esbozo de la situación a nivel, entiendo que viniendo de usted, de la Unión Europea, de cómo los diferentes países han abordado esto, y comentar si a este respecto la Unión Europea se ha planteado recomendaciones, instrucciones conjuntas o una estrategia global. Gracias.
Gracias. We now move to Mr. Zia Altunialdis.
Madam Commissioner, the EU has started to impose restrictions for unvaccinated persons or persons vaccinated by non-EU approved vaccines. In PACE Resolution 2383, COVID passes or certificates, it is stated that preferential treatment should not lead to unlawful discrimination among people in accordance with Article 14 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Why the EU does not accept WHO-approved vaccines, which were also examined based on scientific data? Do you think these measures are in compliance with the Convention as well as rights and freedoms of citizens of other countries? Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the list of 5. So now I yield the floor to Madam Commissioner. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, about, again, the question on sharing vaccines and COVAX, I just wanted to say that what we're seeing now, and we have been working from the beginning with COVAX, and we have one of the greatest funders of COVAX, in order to ensure that vaccines reach every corner of the globe. And I have said this from the beginning, that we're going to continue working on this global dimension. We have now reached, through COVAX, over 140 countries. We can expect a growth in the manufacturing capacity and the availability of vaccines. But we need to also understand as well that the challenge of vaccinating the world is a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. And this is why we're working continuously in order to be able to achieve this. COVAX has been set up in a few months. I believe has been quite successful in global cooperation and already securing millions of doses. And the Commission, through Team Europe, is ensuring that there is vaccine sharing to reach every part of the world. It is true, and I will say this, that the COVAX deliveries up to now are below our expectations. And this is one reason that Team Europe has stepped up our dose sharing to support third countries, both through COVAX and bilaterally. Now, there was a question by Mr. Zotti, I think, on the Nutri-Score. I take note of your concerns. It is a question that has been discussed also in the Council with the agricultural ministers regarding the potential impact of a future harmonized mandatory front-of-pack nutrition labeling of products and how these can affect the Mediterranean diet. I just want to reassure you, and as I have the ministers, that at this stage we have made no choice on the mode and how this will be on the future EU harmonized front-of-pack label. This is something that is going to be based on the result of impact assessments and on the result of the scientific advice from the European Food and Safety Authority in consultation with the stakeholders. I can understand that there are concerns on this, especially to do with some aspects of the Mediterranean diet, that the Commission will take everything into account. All options are on the table, and I believe by working together we can reach a way forward that will make sure that consumers have informed choices on healthier diets. Also, there was a question, I think, on a question on the register of PROSEC, if I'm not mistaken, as a protected designation of origin. By Croatia, all interested parties, including Italy, will now have 2 months to submit their substantiated objection, and the Commission will then analyze any objections received before coming to a final decision. Question on sustainable food, how we will move forward. I believe this Commission in this pandemic has never not put forward its priority in the Green Deal, and as part of my portfolio, the Farm to Fork strategy, a strategy that looks exactly at how we can build and work towards sustainable food systems. And I think that this is extremely important, and the pandemic has shown us and has highlighted the importance of us safeguarding, working through the Green Deal, safeguarding the targets that we have put from farm to fork. It's a strategy that was adopted in May 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. And the reason that we have stuck to all the timelines is we wanted to highlight that the pandemic made this even more important. And the Farm to Fork strategy goes across the board with many ambitious targets, which we're following up continuously, which ultimately all have lead to the same result. And we're in negotiation with about many of them, but I'm very optimistic that given the situation now that the world has been facing, we see the importance of a healthy planet and the importance of the Green Deal in terms of health as one of the priorities. In terms of the question to do with donation to third countries and liability in the vaccines, we have been negotiating and respecting the EU liabilities to protect citizens. We have been negotiating these with the companies throughout, and this has always been a priority, and I think we have succeeded there so that we do not have any issues there for the moment. I'm not sure if I have answered all the questions. If there are any I haven't, please come back to them. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to the next 5 speakers. Probably this will be the last 5. On the list I have Joseph O'Reilly, Nicole Tries, Reinhold Lopatka, Rafael Uzenov, and Maria Mesenchiro. We'll head off with Joseph. Joseph, you have the floor.
Welcome back, Commissioner Stella. I would be interested to hear your views, Commissioner, on an issue I do not see given the importance it deserves, namely the role of the nation in protecting its citizens. It seems that many of the voices advocating selfish self-preservation and national interest have fallen silent in recent months. Our national health system must be supported. Systems must be supported, defended and strengthened. Now is the time to learn what worked best in our neighbour countries and to share expertise and knowledge. As the dark clouds of COVID begin to lift, how can we ensure, Commissioner, a more secure future which includes robust, well-funded national health systems for all our citizens? Could you please comment on any relevant proposals in place at EU level to achieve this protection of health services at nation-state level? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Joseph. Nous passons maintenant à Nicole Tries. Nicole, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame la Commissaire, initiatrice d'un rapport en France sur le parcours de soins pour les patients atteints de la borréliose de Lyme, j'aimerais vous interroger sur ce sujet qui concerne plus d'1 million d'Européens actuellement. Dans une résolution du 15 novembre 2018, le Parlement européen a souhaité mettre en place un plan communautaire de lutte contre cette maladie avec, entre autres, des programmes de recherche clinique et fondamentale. Je sais que la Commission a financé des projets de recherche tels Dual-Dur et ID-Lyme dans le cadre du programme Horizon 2020, mais c'est clairement insuffisant. Aussi, quelle suite entendez-vous donner aux demandes du Parlement européen et envisagez-vous un budget fléché pour une recherche dédiée aux maladies vectorielles à tiques et en particulier la borréliose de Lyme? Je vous remercie.
Merci. We now move to Reinhold Lopatka. Reinhold, you have the floor.
Commissioner, when we launched coronavirus vaccination programs late last year in Austria, we assured that shots wouldn't be mandatory. But now we realize that around a quarter of adults would be unlikely to take the COVID-19 vaccine when it is offered to them. So we see that there is a concrete and strong link between vaccine hesitancy and the use of social media. And therefore, I have 2 concrete questions. What is the European Commission doing in the next future to convince people who have vaccine skepticism to get vaccinated? First question. And second question, do you have concrete plans to create a strong contra-narrative to the fake news and anti-vaccine conspiracy theories?
Thank you. We now move to Rafael Uzenov. Rafael, you have the floor.
Dear Commissioner, although June 8 is celebrated annually as World Safety Day, it is an issue that should be recalled and monitored every day. It is also important to take a comprehensive approach to this problem. After all, the first reason our food is unhealthy is the environment. Therefore, I would like to ask, to what extent do you study and pay attention to the interaction of humans, animal ecosystems, and the environment in the context of food security, and what specific measures do you take in this direction? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to our 5th speaker, Maria Mesenchiro. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear President. Dear Commissioner, I am previously grateful to the whole package of the assistance which been affiliated to Ukraine during the coronavirus pandemic and the stock in the whole world. And recently the Assembly adopted a resolution in improving the policies with regards to the chronic diseases, including breast cancer for women. Given our organic link within the EU and the Council of Europe, I have a question to you. Is there an opportunity to create a platform for non-EU council members to proceed with this program? Many thanks.
Thank you very much. We will now go to Commissioner Stella, we got a lot of very pointed questions, I see that. Stella, you have the floor for the last response.
Thank you, President. Well, the Assembly was always characterized by having a diversity of questions, of opinions, and I think that these are very welcome, whether they're, I think we're here to listen and to discuss, and I want to thank you. First of all, the first question on what we can do and about the health systems of member states. This is a huge issue. Let me just say 2 or 3 points on this. First of all, I think the pandemic definitely showed us the limitations of us working in fragmentation. It has shown us how if we work unilaterally and we cannot deal with such a huge health crisis. Viruses know no borders. This was evident from the beginning. And of course, we need to work together. I will tell you that as part of the European Health Union package and the new authority we're setting up as HERA, this will have also be working with the member states. The member states are very much part of this, so that we can be looking and addressing weaknesses in the health systems, and also looking through this with the new EU for Health program. But ultimately, it's extremely important that we work together in order to address public health crises and issues. And the proposals we've put forward with the European Health Union will be working towards that. There was a question on Lyme's disease. I know that there is also big interest in the European Parliament. I have had the opportunity to discuss this with parliamentarians there. Lyme's disease, what I can say is that maybe not many people know about it, but it is a very serious issue, and we will be looking within the EU for Health program how we can, and the Horizon programs together, how we can address and better coordinate, especially in the areas of research around these diseases. In terms of vaccine skepticism and anti-vaccine conspiracy theories, there is no doubt that this is an area that is of concern to us all, and not only within the EU member states. But I have said before that we cannot look at this with one size fits all. And what I have seen through my visits to member states is that there are vast differences in the reasons why there is vaccine hesitancy and skepticism. I work with the social media platforms, as do other commissioners, continuously. And what we are trying to do is always give and share with member states the scientific knowledge, so that they are able to have their own vaccination communication programs to address the different target groups in member states. Ultimately, what I think is very important is for us to all realize that where we are today in this pandemic, and let me just share with you that we are now at a point when we have the Delta variant in over 99% of the sequenced cases of COVID in the EU. We have reached the point of vaccinating fully about 74% of the adult population, but this is not for all the member states. We're not at the same point, and we cannot be talking only about the member states. We need to look at the world. We need to address as many citizens as possible with correct scientific information, fighting misinformation to get to fully vaccinate people. As long as we don't fully vaccinate all the citizens, we are in danger of having more variants develop, and this puts everyone at risk. So when I say no one is safe until everyone is safe, this is not just a phrase, it's very true. And finally, on the question on the One Health principle and what we can be doing about this, for us, this is a priority. The health, I work under the One Health principle. The health of the environment and the planet and humans, plants and animals are totally interlinked. We are also addressing the serious issue of AMR, antimicrobial resistance. This is a priority in my mandate. I call it the silent pandemic. It has been further highlighted through COVID-19, and we need to work together towards achieving all the goals that we can through One Health. I think that...
Yes, and also vaccines offered to third countries.
Well, I've answered that. The vaccines offered to third countries. We're constantly working through Team Europe and through COVAX in coordination with WHO to make sure that we reach countries as quickly as possible. I think that's, thank you.
Thank you very much, Stella, for all these answers to the questions. I suppose that if any colleagues, and there's a lot of them having much more questions, that they can maybe just send you a friendly mail or something, and that you will then oblige to respond to the extent of the possible. Am I allowed to say that?
Any emails that reach us, we respond to them. Thank you.
Well, I took a little bit advantage of the fact that you're a former president, so it's a bit hard to say no to that one, right? So, colleagues, if any questions remain, I mean, feel free to either through our secretariat or straight forward to the cabinet of the commissioner to have them out. So now we unfortunately must conclude with you. I would love to continue for an hour or two because I'm sure we've got questions for an hour or two. But we now must conclude, and on behalf of the Assembly and also personally, I really want to warmly thank you for all the answers that you have given us, Madam Commissioner, dear Stella. Thank you very much. Let me now remind our members that the ballot for the election of the 3 judges to the European Court of Human Rights in respect to the Czech Republic, the Republic of Moldova and the Russian Federation is open until 3 p.m. Members are invited to cast their vote. The link for voting has been sent once again to secretaries of all delegations, including political groups also, in order to facilitate your voting. So if you don't find the link, then it's really not because we're not handing it out to you. Let us then move to our next item this morning, which is the debate on the report titled Socio-economic Inequalities in Europe, Time to Restore Social Trust by Strengthening Social Rights. This is the document 15365. It is presented by Ms. Céline Saïk-Beuke on behalf of the Committee of Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. And we have Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solution Network, that's a long title, who will make a statement on the issue. We have to conclude, dear colleagues, the debate at 1 p.m. So the person presiding will have to interrupt the list of speakers at about 12:50 to allow time for the replies and the vote before the next debate. Now, the rapporteur has 7 minutes to present the report, and then we'll have a further 3 minutes to reply to the debate at the end. So, Céline, are you ready to go? No. Voilà. Céline, you have the floor. 7 minutes. Mic, please. Microphone. Is the other one? Is to the left, the metal one.
Oh, this one's working.
Yeah,
okay, wonderful. So I'll move my chair so that I can be. Thank you very much.
Just a second, Céline. May I ask all the colleagues who are having some kind of a private meeting type of thing to take it outside, as they say it commonly? Thank you. I know that we are greeting our commissioner, but that can be done there also. Just a second, Céline.
Sure.
We want full attention for you and your report, and then for Professor Sachs. Voilà. Okay. I see that our former president is very popular
That's a good thing.
I hope it'll be as popular as that one day. Who knows? Okay, please, can we go outside, please? It's a bit difficult to ask a commissioner to leave the floor. It's a bit. Whew.
Thank you.
And on top of that, Stella is a former president. So can I please still ask colleagues, please, if you could continue your discussions outside? Thank you. Very nice of you. Voila. Céline, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Socioeconomic inequalities are deep on all dimensions and intersectionality. Policymakers have been rightfully concerned and have been seeking out solutions. The 2019 report of the OECD is titled Under Pressure, the Squeezed Middle Class. It states middle-class households feel left behind as their income grew less than average, if at all. A 2018 report of the OECD, entitled A Broken Social Elevator, provides new evidence of lack of mobility at the bottom as well as the top of the social ladder, calling for a focus on policies to enhance mobility, especially for the lower income. A recent survey in France shows that 72% of French respondents believe that inequality in income and 62% believe inequality in wealth is a serious or very serious problem. A similar survey for Britain shows 80% in Britain also think so. Moreover, in France, 70% believes that the big issue is inequality in opportunity. And in Britain, 60% think the government should take measures to reduce differences in income levels. The people are speaking a word. And my research on the subject, on inequalities, and in my double capacity as rapporteur for this report and as chairperson of the subcommittee on the European Social Charter, has pointed out several other stylized facts. It's not limited with what I have counted. The slowdown in social mobility and extensive intergenerational transmission hampers inequality and hampers children's well-being and their prospects for the future, calling for early childhood interventions. Access to basic health care, access to quality education, better remunerated jobs are more difficult to find for poor households. Housing inequalities are both a symptom and a cause of income inequalities. There is persistent gender pay and pension gap across Europe. Middle income, low income, people from all walks of life, people from different origins, with different identities, all face the challenge of wide socioeconomic inequalities. And people call for equal opportunities. People demand that governments take action to eliminate socioeconomic inequalities. And experts call with urgency the need for us to change our policy frameworks and economic models to ensure inclusive and sustainable development. They underline that business as usual will not do in resolving inequalities. They underline social rights are to be treasured, protected, but more importantly, strengthened, given they are not self-enforcing. The multidimensionality and intersectionality of socioeconomic inequalities necessitates that we have a comprehensive and holistic framework. We need to do so because growth and equality are actually two sides of the same coin. There is need to complement redistribution policies with the creation of productive employment opportunities. The urgency of the matter is very clear post-financial crisis of 2008-09 and COVID-19 pandemic, upon which these inequalities, structural inequalities, have magnified. Austerity measures meant a slowdown in progress of implementation of social rights. In some cases, it even meant turning a blind eye to social rights that are actually enshrined in our national legislation as well as international conventions, including our very own European Social Charter. There was a backslide in the progress towards achieving the UN SDGs, if not being fully sidelined. And all the while, providing equal opportunity to all in basic public services, using public policy to reduce income gaps, are actually basic social and economic rights already enshrined in our legislative convention frameworks. So it's the very basic duty of governments to make sure the rights that are written on paper do not remain on print, but become the very reality of life for the millions. And it is our duty as politicians, as policymakers, to ensure that these words of social rights do become deeds of socioeconomic equality. We need to overcome the disconnect between the economic and financial policy frameworks with human rights and a specific focus of social rights. And this is what this resolution and this recommendation seeks to do. Before listing some of the specific policies that are already in the recommendation in detail and the resolution, I'd like to note two critical messages that come out of this work. First, policymakers should avoid treating social rights as ignorable. Be it during crises such as the pandemic, the global financial crisis, or the climate crisis, or be it in efforts to revamp our system. Overcoming the deep existing socioeconomic structural inequalities through stronger social rights protection is easily pushed back to the back burner, with the excuse that we don't have resources. We cannot allow for this to happen. We do have the resources. Where we choose to use our resources is actually a political choice. We can and must choose to ensure the resources are put in use to guarantee equality, inclusiveness, full protection of social rights that are already enshrined in our national and international legal documents. The second message is that unless strong policy interventions are implemented, the prevailing economic models will continue to create a certain degree of socioeconomic inequalities. Therefore, it's of urgency to revisit the structure to ensure that we look into the structural root causes of inequalities. So it's of urgency that we take up the detailed list of policies and proposals that are included in the resolution. I look forward to a fruitful discussion, and I strongly welcome Professor Jeffrey Sachs, with whom we had a wonderful conversation in the committee this morning, and we look forward to hearing his comments here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Selin. Well, let me welcome Professor Sachs as President of the Assembly. Very much welcome, Professor. You are the current director of the United Nations initiative called, that's the long title again, Sustainable Development Solutions Network, as well as the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. First of all, thank you for taking the time and being present physically to exchange views with our Assembly. As you know, we parliamentarians and lawmakers, we must always seek the advice of experts, which is why your statement here today is very much awaited. Dear colleagues, Professor Sachs is a lifelong advocate for sustainable development. He was awarded in 2015 the Blue Planet Prize for major efforts to solve global environmental problems. Colleagues, he has spent his life advising not only university students as a professor at Columbia and Harvard, but also governments and, as they tell me here, 3 consecutive UN Secretary Generals, being Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, and now Antonio Guterres. That's a lot. Now, your expertise obviously includes issues ranging from economic development, battle against diseases, to stopping climate change and ending extreme poverty. Now, through your career, I've been told you have authored hundreds of scholarly articles and books. That's quite impressive. So, Professor, without any due delay, I yield the floor. You can take the stance up front, which probably will make it a bit easier for you to deliver your comments. Thank you very much again, and you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, thank you very, very much. And ladies and gentlemen, it is really a great honor and delight to be with you and to say some words in support of this very important document and the statement that Selin has just made on restoring and strengthening trust by strengthening social rights in Europe. Europe leads the world in social rights. Europe leads the world in economic rights and social justice. Please continue to do so, and please continue to inspire the world in that. And in order to continue to lead the world, please strengthen the bulwarks now, because they are under tremendous stress everywhere. Let me say on a personal level, I'm coming from a country at the breaking point of social inequality. I arrived from the United States yesterday. My country, we are in utter conflict because the divisions between the wealthy and the poor are greater than ever, and the wealthy are winning this battle. I don't just mean the wealthy, I mean wealth beyond imagining, that owns our media, owns our politics, is destroying American society if they succeed. Europe has avoided this horrible fate by having a wise European social charter, by having social rights, by having decency hard-won after a lot of bloody struggles, but getting it right. But the underlying forces of the world economy are extremely powerful towards inequality. And the underlying forces of politics are extremely powerful towards inequality. The richest 3,000 people in the world, the billionaires, have about $15 trillion of wealth right now. It has soared even during the pandemic. And in my country, they own the mass media, they give the campaign contributions, they drive the politics. We have this week a vote on a rather modest package of tax increases on the rich. It's a knife edge right now, because any tiny attempt to collect from the rich leads to an explosion of rhetoric. It's socialism. We're given the worst warning in the world. We could become like Europe. In the United States, that's almost a curse word, you know. It's unbelievable, the situation that we're in. And I want to stress, of course, COVID has made things dramatically worse in every respect. And we just had a discussion now with the commissioner. The poor are not getting vaccines in the poor countries of the world right now. The situation is not good. The international planning is not fair and not adequate. But even before this pandemic, the situation was dramatic on social inequality. Europe has been holding the line to an important extent, but even in Europe, the inequalities are certainly rising, both in income and wealth. But they have broken free of any constraint in the United States, for example. We have no constraint. We had if you'll excuse me, a psychopathic leader for 4 years, a claimed or actual billionaire whose job it was to deliver tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the world. And he did so in the middle of the night in 2017, which is how our legislation gets passed. This was already happening before COVID. The digital revolution is exacerbating inequalities, both because we are divided between the digital haves and have-nots, and because the digital world will continue to replace jobs of the lower wage and lower skilled workers, which therefore need much more job training and other compensatory actions and universal benefits, so that society does not widen between a Mr. Bezos, who owns $200 billion of wealth today, and people who have absolutely nothing. That would be the digital divide played out in full. And that would be the path unless politics says no. Because the market forces alone will not stop that. So the market forces must be constrained by a politics of social justice and equality and a social charter. The educational gaps are widening, the returns to advanced degrees. Now in Europe, most of that is paid for socially. In my country, young people go into debt, now $1.5 trillion of debt, a whole generation. Half of them not able to finish their degree because they're too much in debt, ending up in the worst of all worlds, no degree and a lifetime of debt. And that's considered normal in a civilized country. By the way, the United States is very rich, but just unbelievably unfair. And without the political resources to be able to fight back so far. We'll see what happens this week. In the US, the last election cycle was $14 billion of campaign funding. Who do you think gave it? The poor people? No. So if $14 billion goes from the richest people, what kind of vote do you think the Congress gives? And that's why we're seeing the struggle, because the congressmen don't want to vote against their campaign contributors, pure and simple. If it weren't for that, we might have a normal civilization, but we don't. We sold it a long time ago. The environmental crisis is making all of this worse. I was mentioning in the committee this morning, 2 weeks ago, we had people drowning in their basements in New York City. Supposedly a sophisticated city. But poor people live in basements, and Hurricane Ida came through, and dozens drowned in their basements in New York City, drowned to death. This environmental crisis is creating not only havoc everywhere, but deepening divides, because some people are vulnerable. They live on banks of rivers. They live in unprotected coastlines. They've been pushed to the most vulnerable geographies. And they are feeling the brunt of heat waves, forest fires, extreme storms, droughts, and floods. And we don't even know truly how bad it is, because it's only when you hear an urgent report from a far-flung place that you begin to feel how much is actually happening. We're able to filter out most of this most days. But on the ground, the environmental crisis is dramatic. And then finally, just to add, in this pre-COVID or other than COVID world, the race to the bottom in taxation completely got out of hand. It started with Reagan and Thatcher, and then Europe responded with tax cuts, then the US went further, then came Trump cutting the corporate tax rate, which used to pay for 1/4 of our budget, and now it is 10% of the budget, because we're collecting 1% of GDP in corporate taxation now in the United States. They're aiming to make it 0, and then maybe we can give away all taxes to the rich. That's the goal, it seems. So we need to stop the race to the bottom. So all of this is to say that there is nothing to take as given in Europe's social conditions today. They are the best in the world, the lowest inequality. Gini coefficients between 0.25 and 0.3 in many countries. In the United States, it's about 0.45. But don't take it for granted. And we already see it rising in many European countries. And many European countries joined the race to the bottom. Why don't we cut some taxes? Why don't we let the rich get richer because we have to compete with the Americans and so forth? And so the idea of strengthening the social rights is timely and appropriate and vital. All of this requires fiscal space because the main tool, not the only, but the main tool of social inclusion is budgetary, to ensure social consumption for education and health, infrastructure for all, and transfers to those who need it. And that requires budgets of 45% of GDP or higher. The huge difference of the US and Europe is Europe, in the European Union, taxes about 45% of GDP on average, and the United States 30%. So imagine lopping off 1/3 of your budget and see what kind of society you would have. Well, it would look a lot like America. I don't recommend it. And so this is what we're grappling with. Now, we need more fiscal space. We need to tax the digital world because that's where the money is now. And just a few companies have gargantuan market capitalization beyond anything we've seen before. Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, the combined market cap is about $8.5 trillion when I checked last week. That's a lot of money. And they are not taxed. That's a game. And when Europe tries to tax the United States, says, no, how can you do that? But you're listening in the US not to politicians, you're listening to the rich who determine what the politicians say. Now, this administration's trying hard right now, the Biden administration, but it's in a huge fight, including with its own party, because the Democrats are also funded by the plutocrats. Not as much. The Republicans sold everything a long time ago. The Democrats, it's somewhat split. But that's the battle that's underway exactly this week. But for Europe, tax digital. Maybe we'll get around to doing that. And let's tax mega wealth also. These huge personal wealth accounts. Mr. Bezos, $200 billion today. And a long list of 100 billionaires. It's unbelievable. We never would have imagined anything like this before. Of Zuckerberg, Gates, and others. All of that is tax-free in the United States, you understand. They pay tiny amounts, if anything, because all their capital gains are untaxed unless they, quote, realize the capital gains, which they don't. And then we have a gimmick in the inheritance to make sure it can all be passed forward. We need a global wealth tax. Also, so you can't just change your registration of where you say you live to avoid the tax. And imagine the poor countries looking at us And we talk about the global community. That's the world I live in day by day, the United Nations. Every other phrase is the global community. There's no global community, believe me. There is a divide that is yawning and widening. So please, fiscal space to be able to carry out a strengthened European social charter. Second, always more Europe. Europe is in the lead of decency, and in order to stay there, Europe needs to act as Europe, both the European Union and the big Europe. And this is extremely important, including transfers across states and pooled resources and common investments. And then globally, for Europe to help inspire and to help lead and to help speak the truth about the need for a universal social charter. We have a universal declaration, which is wonderful, but we don't have a universal social charter, which we need, which would be enforceable by court, as in Europe. So let me just conclude on the global front by saying, first, we need to get vaccines to everybody. This can be done. But to this moment, the vaccine-producing countries and companies have not sat around the table together to do it. Because the companies are out selling their vaccines. Europe is not correct to protect the property rights the way it's been doing. And there isn't a systematic approach to universal vaccine coverage yet. It's amazing to me. I'm watching very, very close in this process. I could elaborate if there's interest. Second, we need global financing for sustainable development, including climate finance. It's a shame that the rich world could not find 12 years after its promise to provide $100 billion, even including loans for climate finance. And now we're going to Glasgow in a few weeks, and that is still unfulfilled. And the poor countries are saying, what is this? You land us with the crises, you promised financing in 2009, we are 2021 and it's not there. And that's not a lot of money, by the way. I can tell you from a macroeconomic perspective. We need to carry on the tax reform globally that is started, and I greatly applaud that we made progress this year. This is extremely important. And finally, we need global cooperation, not a new Cold War. The United States policy towards China is wrong, provocative, and dangerous. Period. Europe should not follow this terrible path. This is the U.S. trying to keep its hegemonic role. We don't need a hegemon. We need global cooperation. And Europe should not follow blindly the U.S. into more conflict, because that is the opposite of social justice. That is the opposite of social rights. That is a waste of time, a waste of money, and a profound danger to the world society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. May I call upon Lyme, one of my vice presidents, to take over the meeting. Thank you very much, Professor, for your words that struck many of us, I've got the impression. So I hope you won't be a stranger in the future. The door is always open. Thank you very much. Lyme?
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, once again, for your statement, which has been listened to with keen interest by all members of the Assembly. Now we come to the list of speakers. I remind colleagues that there is a time limit of 3 minutes on speeches. And in the debate, I call first Mr. John Howell on behalf of the ECDA political group. Please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I think what we've just heard shows that we need to read these reports with a great deal of care. There is a tendency in this Council to see things from a left-of-centre perspective. I disagree with that perspective. The speaker was, the rapporteur was right. This is a question of political choice. And I was surprised, for example, at the last meeting that we had, to see a paper that I believe set out a programme of nationalisation of so much of European industry. I don't think that is the right approach. There is another perspective on this which needs to be set out in these debates. I don't have time in this debate to challenge everything that Professor Sachs has set out. But let me start with a number of points that I think we can agree on. And let me start first of all with housing. There is an emphasis on the importance of good housing, and I share that. The report rightly points to a number of solutions. That I too agree with. One size does not fit all. There is a great importance to increase the availability of social housing, and there is a great role for social renting within that. But there is also a shared equity role as well, where a person becomes a stakeholder in their home. Personally, I speak to many housing associations to see the big issues that are coming up. We need to see wealth cascading down. We need to make sure that our own children can have the necessary wealth to be able to live in a manner that is proper to them. The second issue is health. And I think that we need to avoid the caricature that can occasionally creep into this sort of report, where it simply states that poorer people are fat. They do have unhealthy diets. That is not necessarily a question of money. That is also a question of education. And this is a complex area which needs considerable more analysis. And finally, on the subject of climate change, I would like to understand that more. The report is quite hesitant about saying what the link is between that, and it does use the word seem in order to describe that. So I would like some more information on that. The report points to the role that inequality has in encouraging entrepreneurial risk. I don't believe that. I don't believe that inequality leads to entrepreneurial risk. I believe entrepreneurial risk is something in addition to that we should look at separately to this item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howell. And now our next speaker is Mr. Mamadou Malcolm Jello on behalf of the United European Left political group. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm privileged to speak on behalf of the UL group. And first of all, let me just thank the rapporteur for a brilliant report. We live in a society with growing socio-economic disparities. On the one side, we have the richest 1% who have accumulated twice as much wealth as the 90% of the global population. On the other side, we have 4.6 billion people at the bottom of the global wealth pyramid being confronted by growing disparities in income, wealth, educational achievement, health status, nutrition, living conditions, occupation, housing, etc., etc. You can go on and on. These inequalities not only have profound and more often deadly effects on the most vulnerable and marginalized groups, individuals and communities, but also restrain overall economic development, undermine social justice, and hurt the functioning of our societies. Madam Chair, How is this possible in one of, if not the richest continents in the world? How can we call ourselves first-class democracies and yet have second-class citizens? We have an economic model that commodifies everything. It commodifies our schools, our healthcare, our housing. No sector is spared. We have all witnessed how the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated, magnified, and further entrenched structural inequalities. We have seen increased poverty, the erosion of social rights leading to social resentment and elevated risk of social unrest and political instability. I ask again, how is this possible in one of, if not the richest continents in the world? This is made possible because of the prevailing economic development model, a model in which everything is commodified, a model that systematically erodes social rights, a model that takes from the poor to finance the lavish lives of the rich, reverse Robin Hood, a model that will always entail a certain degree of socio-economic inequalities for it to function. Capitalism, so-called free market economy. So in order to be able to explore the root causes of these socio-economic disparities, we must fundamentally change the prevailing economic model. We must shift to economic policies with a clear objective of equal redistribution of wealth and mechanisms to create equal societies and to better protect the most disadvantaged and the most vulnerable. Madam Chair, we must have policies that promote genuine inclusiveness and sustainable growth and strengthen socio-economic rights. What kind of society would we be? What kind of institution would we be when we see children systematically become victims of extensive intergenerational transmission of inequalities and poverty and do nothing about it? So I call on this Assembly to support the report and its recommendations and to collectively and resolutely act to ensure and guarantee the rights to access to quality education, healthcare, social protection services, as well as adequate affordable housing in order to give every individual, and especially children from less privileged backgrounds, the same opportunities in life as those from wealthier families. Lastly, inclusion leads to growth. And when there is growth, everyone wins. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jallow. And now I call on Mr. Furad Benchika, who will be speaking on behalf of the Socialist Group. The floor is yours, please.
Dear colleagues, I would like first to thank the rapporteur for her excellent work on this report. The growing social economic inequalities in our society damage our economy and tears our society apart. It divides us as citizens from one another. Inequality is a threat for our democracy. And a threat that particularly hits vulnerable and marginalized groups the most, along with older persons, children, persons with disability, women, migrants and refugees. LGBTI people are also disproportionately impacted the socio-economic inequality in Europe. 1/3 of all LGBTI people have difficulty to make ends meet. A striking number of 20% of LGBT people in Europe report experience of homelessness. Many of LGBTI people have lost their job due to the pandemic. Those who lost their jobs and were unable to afford rent often did not have families to return. And if they did, they returned to abusive homes. The root causes of social economy inequality should be tackled. States must invest in sustainable growth while strengthening their social system. To measure is to know. We need to collect adequate, comprehensive data when it comes to social inequality. Legislative and regulatory change to be provided to facilitate access to quality public service, adequate housing, and stable employment. We need to assure equality to live in dignity and security. Our humanity needs equality. Our democracy needs equality. And the survival of our planet is only guaranteed once we can speak of socio-economic equality for all of us. It's up to us to stand against these social economic inequalities and for all member states to commit themselves in breaking the vicious circle of poverty for so many. Social economy inequality is a human-made phenomenon, which means that we can also dissolve and change this structure. The circle doesn't end by itself. As policymakers, we must dare to intervene and break the status quo. We need to do more. We need to act upon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benchika. And now I call on Ms. Elizaveta Jasko, who will be speaking on behalf of the EPP-CD political group. The floor is yours, please.
Dear Chair, dear Rapporteur, dear speakers, I want to ask a question. Is it still in a capacity of states actually to ensure and overcome social and economic inequalities? Isn't it a shame that we even question that? Of course, the state should deal with the inequality. Of course, the state should do everything to make people happy and to serve their needs. But when we think what is the purpose of the state, depending on left, right, or center ideologies, we may have different answers. But I want to ask you to think about the human side of it. Yes, the rapporteur excellently stated about different inequalities that exist right now in child labor, gender, pay, salaries, social mobility. But is really the equal distribution and just adding budgets to the states or collecting more tax is a solution? Or maybe we should think more, okay, what people need to feel free, to develop themselves, to develop their opportunities, and to feel security and protection. I come from the country, Ukraine, that has a communist past. And we used to think in a society that equal distribution would make people happy. But what did we receive in the result? We received millions of ruined lives that, yes, maybe they had access to education, to health, it was for free, but not for everyone. For example, if you were a Jew, or if you were against the Communist Party, did you have the same opportunity? No, you didn't. And now, if we go to the nowadays, it's so great that we have this report right now and we're discussing this right now, but I think the COVID gave us an opportunity to rethink what we actually can do to combat this inequality. I know how many inequalities are for disadvantaged communities around Europe. In every country we can see it. Depending where you come from, depending what opportunities you had, you may not have the same access to education. And it's not only about money, but what is the system is corrupt. I'm asking everyone now to think about the purpose of our parliaments and the states and what we can do to ensure that the creativity, the innovation, and the freedom can actually blossom in our countries so that we really can tackle that inequality. But it cannot be done just by distributing more money to it. We need giving opportunities to people, and that's the main thing that will make them happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jasko. And our last speaker on behalf of the political group is Ms. Diana Stoica, who will be speaking on behalf of ALDE. Please, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, dear colleagues, guests. On behalf of ALDE Group, I would first of all like to thank Ms. Celine Batek-Boke for the excellent work on this report. The effects of COVID-19 medical emergency have been profound, reversing the convergence of the standard living and putting considerable pressure on our social protection systems. Even though Europe's been prospering and growing, the reality is that this is not the reality for every citizen. The socio-economic division has grown, raising concerns both from the perspective of sustainable economic growth and from the perspective of social cohesion. The most vulnerable of us were the most affected. Social inequalities deepen poverty, and poverty is never good business for any nation. We have the duty to tackle the root causes of inequalities, guarantee fundamental rights, and develop national legislation to ensure opportunities for all of our citizens. High and growing inequalities harm our society in many, many ways, not in least in terms of economic growth. In my own Romania, socio-economic inequalities have had a systematic, lasting character. Their sources must be sought out in the mechanism of social stratification. The politicization and weakening of state institutions have fostered corruptions and high profits in the underground economy. This reality has only worsened during the ongoing pandemic. It is our responsibility to leave no one behind, especially those most vulnerable and at risk of poverty. As Ms. Boak's report also highlights, during the COVID-19 pandemic, social inequalities have persisted across age groups, gender, geographical areas, and income clusters, with single-parent families, mostly headed by women, by the way, being at the highest risk ever of poverty and social exclusion. I believe that we need to address the root causes of inequalities within our communities and do so with a clear focus on providing equal access to education, as this factor is key to diminishing the growing prevalence of chronic and long-term diseases in Europe. Investing in and promoting education of children from poorer families will reduce inequality in current and future generations. Now, we may never live in a perfect world, but it is our duty to work together to make sure we reduce the gap as much as possible and to allow each person to become all that they are able to. We must act to rebuild our economies and strengthen our social systems, and we must do so now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stoica. And now we come to our speakers list. I call next Pierre-Alain Frides. 3 minutes, please.
Merci Madame la Vice-présidente, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues. Je tiens tout d'abord à féliciter notre rapporteur pour cet excellent travail sur un sujet ô combien important, celui de ces inégalités qui frappent nos différents pays avec les drames sociaux qu'on connaît. Comme président de la Commission des migrations, je me permets en fait d'étendre un peu le sujet sur un aspect qui va toucher aussi le monde qui nous entoure, comme je l'avais fait déjà en commission. En effet, on a tous en souvenir ce terrible drame en Syrie dans les années 2015, avec ces centaines de milliers de personnes qui sont parties sur les routes cherchant un espoir, un avenir, une sécurité. Et nous avons un pays, l'Allemagne à l'époque, qui avait accepté environ 1 million de migrants pour leur donner une chance, un espoir. Et vraiment, c'est tout à l'honneur de Mme Merkel qui prend ses jours, en fait, sa retraite. Mais qu'est-ce qu'on a vu dans ce pays? On a vu, en fait, une montée des extrémismes, de l'extrémisme de droite, des populations qui refusaient qu'on donne à des étrangers ce qu'eux-mêmes avaient l'impression de ne pas recevoir. Et mon propos est de dire que ce qui est fondamental, si on veut rester une Europe ouverte sur le monde qui nous entoure, être prêt à recevoir des migrants, à donner, à partager avec des gens beaucoup plus pauvres que nous, des gens qui maintenant, avec les phénomènes climatiques, risquent d'être toujours plus nombreux. Il est essentiel que notre société soit une société solide, une société égalitaire, où personne ne se sent rejeté, oublié. On a tous également en mémoire, voilà quelques années ici en France, par exemple la crise des gilets jaunes, où des gens se sont levés pour dire on n'a pas assez, on n'est pas d'accord, on bloque les routes, on veut exprimer notre désarroi face au monde qui évolue trop vite pour nous et où on ne trouve plus notre place. Ici, nous avons effectivement un thème qui est fondamental et je salue vraiment le rapport et le travail qui a été réalisé, parce que c'est de notre devoir de stabiliser notre État, de partager, de créer un filet social le plus organisé et solide possible pour permettre vraiment chez nous à chacun de se trouver à sa place, de se sentir soutenu et protégé. Et ce sera en fait le moyen qui permettra, dans un deuxième temps, d'accueillir plus de gens, parce que notre Europe vieillit, la démographie est claire à ce propos, et nous avons besoin d'accepter des gens, et pour cela, il faut une société prête à les accepter, donc une société égalitaire où chacun trouve sa place. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. And our next speaker is Mr. Alain Milon. The floor is yours, please.
Et merci Madame la Présidente, mes chers collègues. Je tiens moi aussi tout d'abord à féliciter notre rapporteur pour ce rapport qui souligne la montée des inégalités socio-économiques en Europe, que ce soit entre les différents États ou au sein même de chaque État. Ces inégalités sont une menace pour la démocratie et la cohésion de nos États, dans la mesure où elles donnent le sentiment que les institutions négligent une partie de leur population, la plus vulnérable, qui dispose de moins en moins de moyens pour vivre. Il est donc important pour chaque État, membre de notre organisation, qu'il se saisisse de cette question dans un contexte où ces inégalités ont été aggravées par la pandémie. Comme le souligne à juste titre le projet de résolution, on ne peut qu'être préoccupé par le ralentissement de la mobilité sociale et la transmission de la pauvreté d'une génération à l'autre. Cela fragilise le bien-être et les perspectives de développement des enfants, et cela risque fort à moyen long terme d'entamer une forme de sécession risquée pour nos sociétés. Je voudrais tout particulièrement insister sur les grandes disparités qui existent entre les systèmes de protection sociale en Europe et souligner la nécessité que nos États s'emparent réellement de la Charte sociale européenne. Ces disparités se retrouvent au sein même de l'Union européenne. Ainsi, en 2017, la part des dépenses de protection sociale dans le produit intérieur brut était de 30% au Danemark, contre seulement 15% en Roumanie. Une politique sociale plus intégrée à l'échelle de l'Union européenne serait nécessaire pour définir un ensemble minimal de droits du travail avec une protection sociale effective en cas de chômage ou d'accident de travail notamment. Les inégalités socio-économiques ont en effet des répercussions sur la santé des individus. Il ne faudrait pas qu'à l'avenir, les États tentent de limiter leur endettement, qui a été accru par la crise sanitaire, en mettant à contribution de manière excessive les budgets accordés au secteur de la santé. Nous devons y veiller en tant que parlementaires. J'observe à cet égard avec intérêt et satisfaction l'appel de notre rapporteur à recourir à la Banque de développement du Conseil de l'Europe pour cofinancer des projets sociaux prioritaires, notamment pour répartir plus équitablement l'offre de services de santé sur l'ensemble du territoire national et réduire la fracture dans les zones urbaines et rurales. C'est un point qui me paraît particulièrement intéressant et il me semblerait utile que nous l'approfondissions afin que les membres de notre Assemblée soient pleinement en capacité de sensibiliser leurs institutions nationales sur l'intérêt de cette démarche. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Milon. And now I call on Ms. Zeynep Yildiz. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, dear President, dear colleagues. Socioeconomic inequalities have risen in Europe gradually but surely since mid-1980s. With the increased adoption of market-oriented policies in sectors such as education and health, divergences in quality and accessibility of social services have also increased. Concerns over inequalities have further surged in aftermath of post-2008 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. As the socioeconomic inequalities are deepening, the need for taking stock and trying to restore social trust by strengthening social rights is more crucial than ever. I would like to thank the rapporteur, Mrs. Sayek-Böke, for her important and extensive report. She accurately underlines the need for member states to invest in revitalizing their economies while reinforcing their social systems. COVID-19 is a reminder that sustainable development must include massive investments in public services, as emerging evidence suggests that COVID-19 is experienced unequally, with higher rates of infection and mortality among the most disadvantaged communities. Universal coverage, that access to social protection, is key to providing a safety net, especially for the poor and marginalized. We should also remember that fighting socioeconomic inequalities require collective efforts. Member states should work toward improving the regulation and monitoring of financial markets and institutions, encouraging development assistance and foreign direct investment to regions where the need is greatest. Facilitating the safe migration and mobility of people and prioritizing refugees and migrants are also key to bridging the widening divide. As Turkey hosts 3.7 million refugees, it is paying special attention to their needs by running education and aid programs, providing vocational language and psychosocial skills courses, as well as providing them with COVID-19 vaccines and free healthcare. It is my hope that refugees, the most disadvantaged people in this socio-economic crisis, remain high on the agendas of each and every one of our member states. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yildiz. Our next speaker is Ms. Fiona O'Loughlin. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I would like to commend and congratulate both the rapporteur on her excellent work and, of course, Professor Sachs for his passionate and compassionate presentation before us. And there is no doubt that this is a very important agenda debate for us during this week. In the world of fake news, populism and sound bites, we absolutely have to restore social trust, which essentially is a belief in the honesty, integrity and reliability of others, which acts as a foundation for cooperation and contributes to both social integration and democratic stability within our own countries and, of course, within Europe. Understandably, there's been growing concerns about disparities in income, wealth, educational achievement, health status, nutrition, living conditions, occupations, social identity and participation, both within and between our countries. There are glaring inequalities in our society that not only harm individuals and communities, but undermine social justice, hurt the functioning of our society, as well as restraining overall economic development. We need to take action on the basis of national recovery and resilience plans, and we absolutely need to set out and prioritise the creation of decent housing, employment and educational opportunity. The pandemic has deepened global inequality, and it has put into stark relief that we have not made sufficient progress in reducing poverty, in increasing access to quality health care, education, and indeed in relation to climate change. We need to fight for those who are most vulnerable, who do not have a voice, and rely on others and on us to be that voice. Those who are vulnerable, those who are victims, those with disabilities, those who suffer from social exclusion or racism or indeed homophobia. We must put energy and momentum and work collectively to break the cycle of generational unemployment and look at labour activation measures to facilitate transition between education, training and employment. And we need to address the barriers and challenges that are inherent. May I make specific mention of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which by now has been ratified by almost all European countries. And I would urge all member countries to also ratify the optional protocol, which my country, Ireland, hoped to do in early 2022. We must address the systematic and institutional barriers that prevent people from participating in education, in the workforce and society in general because of disability, gender and race. And we need to refocus on the Sustainable Development Goals, which my own country, Ireland and Kenya, were pleased to lead.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. Our next speaker is Olena Homenko. If you hear me, Ms. Homenko, we do not see your request to speak. I was informed that you will speak online, or you are here.
I'm here.
Yes, very good. So the floor is yours, please.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Ms. Céline Seyeg-Böke for this report and extend our support for the cornerstone idea of this report. Europe has to prioritize its human capital and put it at the center of education, healthcare, labor, and fiscal policy. We have already witnessed the great disparities between richest and poorest countries in vaccine procurement, yet now it is amplified again by the governments who want to secure the third dose for each of its residents, while others cannot even get one dose of the potentially life-saving medication. As pointed out in this draft resolution and also mentioned by Resolution 2384 on overcoming the social economic crisis sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic, we evidence weakening of the social systems and amplifying of the numbers of those who are in need of assistance. I totally support the provisions of Para 2 that states should continue to invest in rebuilding the economy, prioritizing sustainable growth and equity. I would like to stress that the social impact of the pandemic on the households cannot be overrated. For instance, in Ukraine, up to 90% of single parents are women, which cast light on the huge gender gap for unpaid care work. Thus, it is of utmost importance to implement Para 10.8 of the resolution, which calls upon states to take stronger legislative action to eliminate the gender pay and pension gap, as well as discriminatory practices in the labor market, practically by creating better employment opportunities and affordable child daycare facilities for working parents. Finally, I would also like to express my support for Para 10.18 of the preliminary draft of the resolution to increase financial resources available for protecting public interest by ensuring full cooperation with the Group of States Against Corruption, GRECO, and the Committee of Experts and on the evaluation of anti-money laundering measures and the financing of terrorism, MONEYVAL, aimed at ending corruption, as implementing zero tolerance to corruption is vital for executing a fair budgetary policy that helps to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I believe that by this resolution, we will draw attention to the current disturbing growth of social inequalities in Europe, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemics, and stimulate the governments to take action and ensure social welfare for the most vulnerable members of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Homenko. Our next speaker is Madam Marietta Karamanli, and she's online. Please, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'espère que vous m'entendez. Oui.
Please go on. Yes.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Avant de vous retrouver dans l'hémicycle, je me permets donc effectivement tout d'abord remercier la rapporteure pour son excellent rapport et sa volonté exprimée de voir les inégalités sociales, économiques mieux évaluées, mieux prises en compte par une politique volontariste des États. Il s'agit bien là d'un défi et nous le savons, il existe des liens entre les droits de l'homme et le développement économique et durable. L'intervention des Nations Unies en charge de ces questions est à la fois normative et statistique. Son objectif est de faire partager les bonnes pratiques et de conseiller les États, y compris concernant la dimension sociale et solidaire de l'économie, en faisant justement valoir que le capital social est aussi nécessaire et selon moi plus déterminant que le capital financier. La question de ceux qui n'ont pas de moyens pour vivre ou qui sont sans emploi et en situation de chômage se pose avec acuité. Se pose aussi la question de la qualité de la croissance et des inégalités croissantes affectant le monde. Le rapport le souligne. La force du Conseil de l'Europe réside justement dans son système conventionnel. Nombre de nos travaux ont mis en évidence l'importance d'un impôt progressif d'un suivi des titres financiers, d'un droit effectif à l'éducation et à l'emploi, et enfin de la nécessité d'investissements publics de qualité pour concilier justement croissance pour tous, croissance respectueuse de l'environnement et réduction des inégalités. Alors, Madame la rapporteure, peut-être pourrions-nous faire œuvre utile en établissant une liste de nos propositions en la matière et en proposant une méthode justement d'évaluation de leurs effets socio-économiques. Nous défendons aussi une vision européenne, commune, qui garantisse un niveau juste de taxation et enraie justement la compétition du moins-disant en matière d'impôts des entreprises. Donc cette concurrence a profité majoritairement aux acteurs économiques les plus forts, les plus mobiles, et les classes populaires et moyennes subissent encore aujourd'hui ce manque de pouvoir d'achat du fait des hausses de la CSG, de la TVA et autres taxes indirectes qui montrent bien les limites de l'efficacité de l'impôt. Voilà, Madame la rapporteure, mes chers collègues, ce que j'aurais souhaité effectivement dire sur ce rapport important et remercier une nouvelle fois la rapporteure et demander à ce que ces éléments puissent être pris en compte dans le suivi et dans les réponses qui pourront être apportées tout à l'heure. Je vous remercie, à tout à l'heure.
Thank you very much, Madame Karamanli. We were able to hear you. Unfortunately, we were not able to see you. Our next speaker is Madame Laurence Strasbourg-Isnar, and she will be online as well. Please, the floor is yours.
Bonjour, merci Madame la Présidente, vous m'entendez bien? Merci. Donc Madame la Présidente, chers collègues, permettez-moi tout d'abord d'exprimer ma satisfaction à ce que les inégalités socio-économiques soient aujourd'hui discutées au sein de notre Assemblée. Je tiens à remercier notre collègue, Madame Céline Sayek-Bock, pour son rapport de qualité qui propose plusieurs axes d'amélioration intéressants. Si l'Europe est une région du monde développée technologiquement avancée, avec un indice de développement
Yes, I see that we have some technical problems. If we can do something about this. I was told that the connection is poor, and that is the reason why speech was interrupted. Can you try once again? She's not online. Okay, so I will give the floor to our next speaker, and we will try to fix the problem with Madame Strasbourg-Isnar. Our next speaker is Ms. Petra Bayer. 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. President. Céline, I also want to applaud you for this really comprehensive and important report. And I especially want to line out article or paragraph 10.4, where that tackles the impact of economic activities and human rights. And we must not forget the situation beyond Europe due to long and very complex supply chains, environment, social rights and human rights are infringed. We see, for instance, poisoned air, ebbing fresh water, child labor, slave work, and much more of incredible living and working conditions all over the world. And taking into account that socio-economic inequalities not only exist in Europe, but to a much higher extent globally, we have the moral and the political duty to terminate both social inequalities and the infringement of human rights everywhere with our policy, with our laws. We need corporate responsibility and liability not only at the level of voluntary commitments like the UN Global Compact or the OECD guidelines on business and human rights, all these measures for decades now did not change the lives of people in the global south to the better. They did not stop human rights violations or the degradation of the environment, and they did not create any liability and accountability of the private sector. So I want to remind you that at the moment at the UN Human Rights Council, there is a debate or a negotiation going on a global level about a treaty, on a binding treaty on business and human rights. And I really would like to call all our member states to proactively support this discussion and negotiation, where we really could find a solution for the working conditions of human beings worldwide. It was initiated by Ecuador and South Africa, and I think it would really be a step forward to have a treaty, a binding treaty on a global level that avoids that we import human rights violations, that we import the degradation of environment with all those products we here in Europe consume and wear and whatever we do with it, and forget about what happens in the global supply chain. We are responsible also for people elsewhere, and so thank you very much for also tackling this into your report.
Ms. Bayer, thank you. Thank you very much for your contribution. And our next speaker is Mr. Lorinc Naxa.
Thank you. I'm here.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you, Chair. Thank you for the floor. There are many challenges in the social and employment field, and several are highlighted in the report under discussion today. We can say that many of these challenges are not unique to one member state. They affect each and every one of us, but in a different manner. As a result, from a Hungarian perspective, I would like to emphasize that the safeguarding of national competencies should be the starting point of the discussions when it comes to the social and employment field. In our view, in employment and social matters, it is the member states who are first and foremost able to find the policy solutions tailored to their own circumstances. But of course, while this and similar debates are always useful, international comparisons, exchanges of ideas, and sharing best practices are always welcome. As you may be aware, the European Union has created a competitor for the Social Charter of the Council of Europe, namely the European Pillar of Social Rights adopted back in 2017. While we agree with these principles, we maintain our opinion that there was no need to place them under an overarching social pillar. I'm happy to say that as a result, we are proud of that in Hungary, more than 4.7 million people had jobs in July after the pandemic. Our country had not had this many people in employment since the change of regime back in 1989. The economy added nearly 1 million jobs over the last 11 years, so Hungary was just one step away from full employment. And I would like to add that the Hungarian family support system is widely known. This year we are dedicating more than 5.2% of the GDP to family subsidies. We are committed to achieving the Hungarian version of the social model, which is based on 4 pillars: competitiveness, work-based society, family policy, and national identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naxa. And now I will give the floor to Madame Laurence Strastur-Isnar. I see that she is waiting for the floor, so our second try, please.
Bande passante soit meilleure. Pour en reprendre où j'en étais, je crois que cette réalité mérite toute notre attention et que ce rapport est le bienvenu. L'enjeu de notre époque est celui de la prospérité. Nous devons penser notre mode de vie, notre système, nos emplois et les droits sociaux afin qu'ils soient respectueux à l'égard de chacune des personnes vivant au sein de nos États membres. La crise de la Covid-19 a démontré l'importance des droits sociaux. La pauvreté, le fléau.
Yes, I have to apologize, but the line is really poor. And I have to introduce another speaker. Our next speaker is Lord Richard Balfe. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Inequality is a bit like sin, isn't it? We're all against it, but on occasions we quite enjoy some of the byproducts thereof. I put forward the argument that certain level of inequality is inevitable, but it's in the sensible interests of the state to promote equality in certain areas, if only to get the best out of the people. Because if you have discrimination in education and in health and in other areas, you actually end up not functioning well as a society. And that has been the basis of the social democratic settlement in Western Europe. We spend money on educating our people. They don't go without health care as they do in the United States. And we live in a properly regulated and policed society. But once you get beyond that, you start to run into trouble. And the biggest trouble we run into is how much of the GDP you actually spend. Professor Sachs mentioned 45%. That is probably the maximum that you can get away with in a democracy. Because the problem in a democracy is that you have a clash between democracy and the willingness to pay to end inequality. And people vote with their pocketbook. I will only quote one American, and that was Paul Samuelson, who invented the concept of the free rider. Most people want to spend more on welfare, but they want to spend it out of someone else's pocket. And that's quite important. So what we have to deal with is how we can get an equal-based society. And it's fine for Professor Sachs to rail against Jeff Bezos and all the rest. And indeed, I hope, Madam Rapporteur, you could offer Professor Sachs asylum in Europe, because he clearly doesn't like the place where he lives. But what I would suggest is that we're in a position where we need to balance the needs of the equal society against the willingness of people to pay for it. Now, that's not an easy concept, but overall, the biggest weakness at the moment is that the middle class are paying the taxes, the very rich are escaping the taxes, and the very poor are demanding more taxes because they don't actually have to pay the taxes. That's the conundrum that you have to solve. I've had many interesting evenings with members of the CHP in your country, and I know that they will be able to add much intellectual rigour to the debate you're going to have.
Thank you very much, Honourable Lord Balfe. And now I call Ms. Lesa Vasilenko. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to join in the praise of the author of this report, who truly did a remarkable job in presenting us with an all-encompassing study of the issues of socio-economic inequalities across Europe. This report proves yet again that economic, social, and political inequalities are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. The short-term, simple solution is, of course, to ensure higher wages and more jobs at national state level, accompanied by a fairly differentiated tax burden. However, it has long been established that economic growth does not always lead to equal opportunities and shared possibility. The pandemic and the ever-growing climate crisis urge society to change the modus vivendi of today, the way we live, particularly by quenching overconsumption and appeasing environmental and economic interests. As Europe strives to decarbonize and become the first net zero continent by 2050, the Green Deal transition needs to be fair and smooth, with no one left behind. As the coal and fossil fuel use is phased out, employment in the fossil fuel sector must not turn into mass unemployment. Whole towns and regions must not be marginalized and be thrown overboard by the renewables revolution. And finally, the basic needs and resources cannot become inaccessible to all but the wealthy 1%.
In order to prevent such a scenario, parliaments need to endorse and adopt just transition programs. Similarly to some of the countries in this assembly, Ukraine has already begun to develop the necessary legislation and structure of such a Green Deal fair integration program. Discussions are plenty around the setting up of a special just transition or climate fund and having a climate framework law adopted. However, in the face of a global problem, such individual national solutions and unaligned policies will not yield results. The socio-economic inequalities resulting from climate change can only be tackled by simultaneous and equal international efforts. Thus, next to national initiatives, an all-European Just Transition Fund must be set up. All countries on the European continent, and not just EU member states, should have a proportional share in this fund. This will ensure a fair and sustainable development of the wider European community. And as a result, I believe, it will close many inequality gaps mentioned in the report, including the access to the services gap, the education gap, the health gap, and the gender gap. Thus, colleagues, I conclude by definitely upholding the idea that social and economic rights must be revisited, revised, and strengthened according to the proposals in the report, but nonetheless, I strongly claim that we in this assembly have the task to find common solutions and responsibility to share resources in order to prevent further socio-economic injustices resulting from new, over-encompassing global challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vasilenko. I call next Ms. Dumitrina Mitreya. The floor is yours, please.
Mrs. President, dear colleagues, combating inequality, that is a focal point we want to talk about today. And I will because it's a crucial issue. But inequality is not something that only affects poor countries. Inequality affects all of us. The trend is manifest. More and more of the wealth is in the hands of fair and fair people. And the reason is that as the very rich get even richer, things get priced beyond the reach of even the relativity well of middle class. Excessive inequality has no benefits of all. In fact, it has disturbing effects, such as discouragement and depression. People can inspire each other, but they can also frustrate, discourage, and upset each other. And that what gross inequality does, even in prosperous parts of the world. It unravels the very fabric of societies. It robs people of decent jobs and decent pay. And it robs them of their sense of purpose and self-worth. But the gap between rich and poor is far bigger in developing countries. Inequality is not technical issue. It's not just an object you can fix with the right tools and know-how, and it becomes functional again. Inequality is above all the result of political choice, and that means tackling it is a political responsibility. Whether it is conflict, climate change, economic stagnation, or migration flows, inequality is always a major underlying factor. So you can say that the inequality is truly or architect of world crisis. The United Nations motto, leave no one behind, could be the cornerstone of the battle we must win in the war against this kind of inequality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mitreya. Our next speaker is Mr. Alexander Mereshko. Please.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, the key question we're trying to answer is how to solve the problem of global poverty and economic inequalities. The answer to this difficult question lies in the psychological theory of law developed by Leon Petrozhitsky. to be more specific in his concept of scientific legal policy. In this regard, I would like to make several simple points. First of all, solution to the problem of poverty and socio-economic inequality in the final analysis does not depend on the redistribution of wealth. It depends primarily upon creation of wealth. Second, creation of wealth depends upon the high level of the entrepreneurial spirit in a given society and high level of legal culture, legal consciousness in the society. Third point, law as a psychic phenomena which exerts influence upon human psyche, individual and collective psyche, creates the corresponding motives or stimuli for the development of the legal consciousness and dynamic entrepreneurial spirit. For example, one of such stimuli having psychic effect are taxes. And finally, to solve the problem of poverty and socio-economic inequalities, we need to create and implement an adequate scientific legal policy. And without such a policy, it is hopeless to solve these problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mereshko. Our next speaker is Mr. Zoran Tomic, and he will be addressing us online. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank Rapporteur on good report and recommendations on this problem. As you know, socio-economic inequalities are a problem facing not only Europe, but the whole world. One of the priorities of all countries should be to fight for these differences to be as small as possible. And the reasons are precisely the unpredictable circumstances that can lead to negative effects on a global level, such as coronavirus pandemic. It is the pandemic that clearly showed how much of a problem socioeconomic inequality can pose to countries in the fight for the health of their citizens. And I am glad that Serbia, the country I come from, has worked on this matter previous period to reduce these inequalities through numerous instruments and measures implemented by the states from programs for employment of hard-to-employ categories of people, through investments in education, health, culture, sports, and business sector. All these become more accessible to a wider number of citizens. Exactly such efforts proved to be good in the fight against the corona, because in the previous period, Serbia built 3 new COVID hospitals in just
Sorry for those technical problems. We are trying to restore our line. In order to save time, I will give the floor now to our next speaker, and I will give the floor to Mr. Zoran Tomic later on. Our next speaker is Mr. Andrei Hunko. 3 minutes, please.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin, meine Damen und Herren. Ich möchte erstmal der Berichterstatterin Selin Böke ganz herzlich danken für diesen sehr, sehr guten Bericht, der zur richtigen Zeit auch kommt und auch, wie schon unser Redner Mamadou gesagt hat, die volle Unterstützung hier der Fraktion der Vereinigten Europäischen Linken bekommt. Dieser Bericht steht ja in der Tradition auch einer Reihe von Berichten, die diese Versammlung in der letzten Zeit verabschiedet hat. Ich will erinnern, im Juni hatten wir die Debatte zur Überwindung der sozioökonomischen Krise, die durch Covid ausgelöst wurde. Und es ist auch eine ähnliche Debatte, wie wir heute haben. Und das ist sehr gut so und das ist sehr richtig so. Und ich will auch erinnern, dass es diese Versammlung war, die im Jahre 2012 die Fehlentwicklung, die wir damals hatten, in Reaktion auf die Finanzkrise und die spätere Euro-Krise kritisiert hat, die Kritik an der Austeritätspolitik. Und ich glaube, dass man rückblickend sagen kann, dass das richtig war. Wir waren die erste internationale Organisation, die darauf hingewiesen hat. Wir erleben international einen Paradigmenwechsel in der Frage der Ungleichheit. Auch die Debatte innerhalb der OECD geht in die gleiche Richtung. Vor 10, 20 Jahren wurde Ungleichheit noch als positiv angesehen, weil es die Wirtschaft stimulieren würde. Heute wird gesehen, dass Ungleichheit, wie das auch im Bericht festgehalten ist, auch zu wirtschaftlichen Problemen führt und zu Stabilität in den Gesellschaften. Ich möchte aber auch ganz herzlich mich bedanken für die Rede von Jeffrey Sachs. Ich fand, das war eine sehr beeindruckende Rede. Er hat sehr stark betont die Notwendigkeit der Steuer, der Taxation. Im Deutschen ist Steuer und Steuern ein Wort. Eine Gesellschaft kann nur gesteuert werden, wenn Steuern erhoben werden. Ich möchte mich auch dafür bedanken, dass er die Notwendigkeit der internationalen Kooperation auch in dieser Frage betont hat und nicht das Abgleiten in einen neuen Kalten Krieg, der natürlich diesen Kampf auch erschweren würde. In der Recommendation, die ich auch sehr bemerkenswert finde in diesem Bericht, ist auch verwiesen auf die Notwendigkeit des Beitritts der Europäischen Union zur Europäischen Sozialcharta, weil ja diese Pillar for Social Rights, die europäische Säule sozialer Rechte, kein Ersatz ist für die Sozialcharta. Und ich denke, wir sollten das stark machen, wir sollten das betonen, damit auch die Europäische Union hier die Sozialcharta stärkt, denn wir brauchen eine Stärkung der Sozialcharta und den entsprechenden politischen Willen. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Junco. I was informed that we lost access to our kudo system, so it's a bigger problem than what I expected. And now I will be giving the floor to those who are present in the plenary hall only. Mr. Hector Vasconcelos, if you are here, please show. Yes, please, the floor is yours.
Oui, d'abord, je voudrais vous dire à quel point ça me fait plaisir d'être de nouveau parmi vous, malgré cette affreuse épidémie. Informo que México continúa trabajando para adherirse al Convenio de Estambul que combate la violencia hacia la mujer. En estos momentos nos encontramos en las etapas finales del análisis sobre las implicaciones que tendrá esta adhesión en cada una de las instancias involucradas del gobierno mexicano. Para nosotros, el Convenio de Estambul es de suma importancia porque busca prevenir y combatir la violencia más constante e inmediata contra las mujeres, la doméstica, la que se da en el núcleo familiar. Estos esfuerzos se suman a la reforma constitucional en materia de paridad de género que aprobamos en 2019 y reafirman que el actual gobierno de México ha sido el mayor impulsor de oportunidades para las mujeres en la historia de nuestro país. Hoy tenemos paridad de género en ambas cámaras del Congreso. El Senado está presidido por una mujer y el gabinete presidencial cuenta con 8 mujeres en puestos titulares. El convenio ofrece un marco jurídico moderno que contempla como obligación de los estados el establecer servicios de protección y apoyo para responder a la violencia contra las mujeres. Asimismo, brinda instrumentos y directrices para combatir estigmas y prejuicios a través de la educación. La gran virtud del Convenio de Estambul es, entonces, la posibilidad de ir al fondo del asunto para transformar aspectos estructurales. En cuanto nuestros procesos internos hayan concluido, el presidente de México o el secretario de Relaciones Exteriores darán el aviso oficial a la comunidad internacional de nuestra adhesión al Convenio de Estambul. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Señor Vasconcelos. And now I will give the floor to our colleague Zoran Tomic. I see that you requested is yes, please. Go on.
My speech, as I told, we in Serbia built 3 new COVID hospitals in just 4 months in order to help our citizens to save their health and to fight against coronavirus. And in addition, we are producing currently 2 vaccines. And in future time, we are going to have 5 vaccines from 5 producers, so that our campaign of vaccination is going well, and we are making sure that everyone has the access to the vaccines. And the measures from that state is doing, from financial aid to economy, citizens and artists and other part of the population, through payments of the financial aid, minimum wages, is the way the state is helping them in these difficult times, especially for the people whose professions are endangered due to the pandemic, and so that they can fight and survive until the situation returns to normal, or they adapt to new circumstances. That is why I personally believe, and also members of the Serbian delegation, that this resolution came in the right time, and that all countries should give their best to help alleviate socio-economic inequalities with the available instruments and the measures. And only through mutual cooperation we can succeed in this. That is why today, more than ever, it is necessary to cooperate and help each other, and not to provoke and consciously endanger the lives of the citizens for the sake of the political points. So that is why I will support this mentioned resolution and the report, and I call on the other members of the Assembly to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tomic. And now I call next Mr. Koloman Brenner. The floor is yours, please.
Dankeschön, Frau Präsidentin. Ich möchte einerseits betonen, dass dieser Bericht zu einer sehr aktuellen Zeit wirklich stattfindet und die Diskussion darüber. Zweitens möchte ich den Punkt erwähnen, der bis jetzt in dieser Diskussion noch nicht angesprochen wurde, nämlich, dass einerseits Ungleichheit nicht nur in der Gesellschaft unserer Mitgliedstaaten besteht, sondern Ungleichheit besteht auch geografisch innerhalb von unseren Mitgliedstaaten, das bedeutet regional gesehen, und auch auf dem europäischen Kontinent. 32 Jahre nach der politischen Wende gibt es noch eine sehr große Ungleichheit zwischen dem westlichen Teil von Europa und zwischen den Staaten von Ostmitteleuropa, wo ja bekannterweise nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg eine sowjetrussische Besatzung und ein kommunistisches Regime herrschte bis 1990. Und eben deswegen war es meine Partei, die Mitte-Rechts-Volkspartei Jobbik, die eine europäische Bürgerinitiative gestartet hatte über die sogenannte Lohnunion. Nämlich, lassen Sie mir ein konkretes Beispiel nennen aus meiner Heimatstadt Ödenburg-Schopron, 60 Kilometer von Wien entfernt. Benzin kostet in Österreich genauso viel wie in Ungarn. Die ungarischen Bürger fahren rüber nach Österreich zu tanken, weil dort Benzin eine bessere Qualität hat, und kaufen in Billa ein, weil dort sie eine bessere Qualität von Lebensmitteln bekommen, auch wenn eigentlich dieselbe Firma diese Lebensmittel auch für Ungarn herstellt. Das bedeutet, dass wir auch über diese Fragen dann am Rande von diesem Bericht reden müssen. Ich meine, dass Steuersätze natürlich einerseits Leistung unterstützen müssen, andererseits soziale Ungleichheit natürlich bekämpfen müssen. Aber erinnern wir uns bitte an die Gründerväter der Europäischen Union. Konrad Adenauer, de Gasperi, Schumann. Sie alle waren genau solche christlich-soziale Politiker wie wir in meiner Partei. Und wir wissen, dass soziale Marktwirtschaft für unsere bürgerliche Demokratie besonders wichtig ist. Soziale Komponente ist nicht gleich mit links, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Eine wirkliche, anständige konservative Partei unterstützt zum Beispiel Arbeitnehmerrechte. Ich darf Ihnen berichten, dass zum Beispiel in meinem Heimatland Ungarn vor 2 Jahren ein sogenanntes Sklavengesetz verabschiedet wurde, wo die Arbeitnehmerrechte von der jetzigen Orbán-Regierung ziemlich beschnitten wurden. Das ist also keine Frage von links oder rechts, sondern Wohlstand und Freiheit kann nur durch eine soziale Marktwirtschaft entstehen. Deswegen begrüße ich diesen Bericht. Dankeschön.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brenner. I call Ms. Margaret de Boer. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Socioeconomic inequality is one of the most pervasive issues of our time. A globalized world led to a race to the bottom in terms of labor and production prices, and in this process the rights and position of workers were diminished. Government policies allow big companies as many taxation liberty as possible while cutting down on social welfare system and redistributive methods, all for the sake of the ever-powerful market. And recently, the COVID pandemic deepened already existing inequalities. Socioeconomic inequalities almost seem like a logical consequence of this global system, but they are not, and we surely should not accept. As the report aptly points out, socioeconomic inequalities are not only detrimental to those in lower socio-economic strata, but to societies as a whole. Inequality hampers economic growth. Inequality disturbs the social structure of societies by creating divides, mistrust, unrest, and polarization. Inequalities contribute to climate change, and inequalities destroy lives. Groups in lower socio-economic strata suffer from negative health impacts, different education outcomes, inequality of opportunity. And another severe issue of this time is the lack of the fulfillment of people's housing rights, with people unable to find adequate housing or having to spend most of their income on rents. The self-perpetuating character of these inequalities leads to a continuous cycle. An intersectional approach shows that those hit the hardest are those with other vulnerabilities. In this context, legislative and regulatory changes of a social, egalitarian nature are the only way forward. We need to change the system. For this to happen, it is paramount to remove the fictitious dichotomy between social welfare and wealth distribution on the one hand, and economic progress on the other. The information included in this report should support a move away from this antiquated assumption. I applaud the rapporteur for extensively discussing fiscal policies in the report, as I believe they are an important but often overlooked driver of inequality, but also could be a mechanism to correct inequalities, both in income and in wealth. It is suggested in the report to rethink inheritance taxation as a means to facilitate the intergenerational transmission of wealth to combat inequality. I am not sure that is something we should strive for, because low inheritance taxation could also perpetuate inequalities, as it creates unequal starting points depending on the socio-economic status of one's family. Concluding, I will fully support the report and I thank the rapporteur.
Thank you very much, Ms. de Boer. Our next speaker is Ms. Larissa Bilozir. 3 minutes, please.
Dear colleagues, Madam Chair, first of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur, Madam Kyriakides, for an excellent, comprehensive report that did miss a thing. There is clearly defined problems and various reasons of social inequalities. Most important solutions are offered. Indeed, the issue of socio-economic inequality among people accompanies society throughout its history. It is still relevant today because, on the one hand, labor productivity and global GDP are constantly growing, and on the other hand, the search for funds for a decent life also remains the main challenge for most people. According to the UN, as of 1990, 77% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today, the same share of people has decreased by 4 times. However, even today, the problem of poverty remains on the agenda even in the most developed countries, as we heard from Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And this problem has only worsened because of the coronavirus crisis. As an example, the main reason for the decline in income received over the past year was the increase in the share of people who lost their jobs due to coronavirus restrictions. The income received among the working age population in the EU countries decreased by 7% compared to 1990. COVID-19 is a global challenge, and there is no country that do not suffer economic losses. In the context, the Assembly's concerns about the protection of socio-economic rights of citizens of member states, which is set out in the European Social Charter, are extremely relevant today. Social protection is about promoting access to medical and educational services, proper public services. This is especially important for people with disabilities and other socially vulnerable groups of the population. As you know, the European Social Charter guarantees persons with disabilities the right to social integration and participation in society. In Ukraine, the number of people with disabilities is almost 3 million people, and almost 80% of them are of working age and need rehabilitation and employment. Currently, the Parliament of Ukraine developing draft law designed to create favorable field and tax conditions for employment of people with disabilities. Investing in people, human capital development should remain a key priority for all European countries. In situations of such crises and shocks, social protection is an important stabilizing element that allows the economy to absorb these shocks and also recover. Finally, social protection of the population contributes to social peace because it reduces injustice and creates connection between people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Belazir. And our last but not least speaker is Mr. Petri Honkanen. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Social equality is the basis where we build human rights and democracy. Throughout Europe, differences between regions in livelihood and wealth are large. These differences are apparent especially in rural areas. There are many aspects explaining this phenomenon. The key issue is the level of industrialization in the region. If there is very little industry in the area, it is often more undeveloped in socio-economic terms. In addition, another central question is how many higher competency jobs there is in sparsely populated areas, as well as in the areas that have experienced industrial restructuring. In order to reduce socio-economic disparities between regions, I would like to raise 3 significant matters. Firstly, industrialization and business policy interventions are basic means to develop the socio-economic situation of a region. Secondly, housing policy is also a very focal in reducing inequalities. Weak housing conditions degrade development and reinforce socio-economic difficulties even more. Third, and the last point I would like to emphasize here is the importance of education in reducing socio-economic inequalities. The fact that children and young people in sparsely populated areas have access to quality education on an equal basis until the highest level is necessary to combat social inequality. This is not yet a reality in every region, but it should be an essential objective in everywhere. It should not depend on a place of residence or wealth of the parents or the family how good education a child may get. As Mrs. Saik-Böke states in her excellent report, equal opportunities for access to quality public services prevent social disparities. Therefore, it is highly important to ensure the availability of public services in every region, especially in rural areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Honkonen. I must now interrupt the list of speakers. Our time allocated for this debate has expired. I have to inform all of you that the speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present physically or remotely during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report, provided that speakers connected remotely can report their actual presence when the debate is closed. I remind colleagues that typewritten texts must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. And now I call Ms. Céline Sayek-Böke, our rapporteur, to reply to the debate. And you have 3 minutes, madam. Please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking each and every of our colleagues for their very important contributions and actually indeed a very fruitful debate. And I strongly hope this enthusiasm that we're sharing lasts across our policies and legal issues that we deal with when we go back to our member states. A couple of comments, and I'd like to underline some of them in reference to already what we have in the resolution. There seems to be, even though we use different words, a common agreement that we seek an equal opportunity-based society. Mr. Balf mentioned this. We seek that the poor actually have access to get good education. This is what Mr. Powell actually mentioned. We seek a strong social infrastructure with good quality public investment. This is what Ms. Karamanli mentioned. I can extend this list. So I believe what we have stated in the resolution by saying fiscal policies should be mainstreamed with social objectives and social rights, and budgets should be directed by the very basic social rights providing equal opportunities, ensuring that everybody feels they have access to the same health system, the same education system, so that they can actually be physically safe and live a dignified life. I am very happy to report that we are in unison in regard to this request. We might be using different words, but the common base is there. The second issue that I think popped up very strongly to me is that we are all seeking to improve the incentive structures. These incentive structures so that market forces that prevail and will continue to prevail do not eat up social justice. They don't swallow them up. That's what we're seeking. And I'm happy to hear that there is a common agreement there as well, that we are actually trying to ensure that whatever healthy competition policy we have, it actually makes sure that production continues, productive employment opportunities by both the private sector and the public sector are actually operational in the system. So I believe when I had stated in my previous intervention with the following sentence, we need complementarity between redistribution policies, which should be there, but complemented with the creation of productive employment opportunities. And I'm happy to hear when Ms. Jasko intervened that we do seek to have these stable and productive employment opportunities complemented with redistribution policies. I am also very happy to have heard from several of our colleagues that we do need to seek to ensure that we have reskilling, upskilling. When we think of education, we don't just think of it as the education for the young, but rather to ensure that with appropriate social protection and reskilling and upskilling, people are actually able to achieve those productive opportunities. Ms. O'Loughlin mentioned this when she spoke of the labor market activation policies. And finally, I am happy to have heard that we do seek an international coordination and cooperation out of this very organization. Ms. Beyer, Mr. Burr, rightfully mentioned what Jeffrey Sachs had already said. We need to form a global community, and we already have these in the report. So I would like to hope that we will take this common understanding to actually contribute to that global community. And I hope the enthusiasm prevails throughout the day when the voting might actually be delayed, I understand. but more importantly, it prevails after today so that we actually implement these things. And I thank, in my last words, to the Secretariat, who has been an immense support. And I'd like to end with the following sentence. Social rights are not a cost. They are actually an investment in today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Rapporteur. And now I call Mr. Luis Leite Ramos, the chairperson of the committee. If you wish to speak, please do. 3 minutes, please.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers collègues, le rapport que nous venons de débattre met en exergue la mobilité sociale. En effet, l'ascenseur social de nos pays est en panne depuis des années. La crise financière mondiale de 2008-2009 et la pandémie du Covid-19 ont encore exacerbé les inégalités structurelles profondes et persistantes. C'est une injustice sociale qui freine le progrès économique de notre société. Le rapport de Mme Sayek-Bock s'inscrit dans la continuité de l'approche de notre Assemblée. Il concerne les responsabilités des autorités nationales de garantir les droits socio-économiques pour toutes et tous. Il nous rappelle la résolution 2384 intitulée « Surmonter la crise socio-économique déclenchée par la pandémie du Covid-19 le juin dernier ». L'Assemblée avait alors clairement qualifié les mesures d'austérité budgétaire prises durant la dernière décennie comme des erreurs. Elle a appelé les États à investir davantage dans une croissance réellement inclusive et durable. Nos États doivent agir à travers de larges spectres de politiques socio-économiques. Je remercie Mme Sayek-Bock, au nom de la Commission des questions sociales, de la santé et du développement durable, d'avoir proposé une feuille de route afin de réaliser le diagnostic des inégalités dans chaque pays et le suivi des options politiques. Le but n'est pas de casser la croissance économique, mais au contraire de la soutenir de manière véritablement inclusive et d'assurer l'égalité des chances de manière plus juste à travers toute la société et entre les générations. Chers collègues, la Charte sociale européenne fête cette année son 60e anniversaire. Faisons en sorte que cet anniversaire devienne une occasion de renouveler notre attachement aux droits sociaux, économiques et leur mise en œuvre pour tendre vers une société plus juste, plus prospère, plus soucieuse du bien-être de toutes et tous. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And now our debate is closed. I have to inform all of you that we have technical difficulties with our remote voting system, so we have to postpone the votes on the draft resolution and draft recommendation to this afternoon by 5 p.m. And the vote would be taken after the communication from the chair of the Committee of Ministers. I would also like to remind members that the ballot for the election of the 3 judges to the European Court of Human Rights in respect of the Czech Republic, the Republic of Moldova, and the Russian Federation is open until 3 p.m. Members are invited to cast their vote. And my last announcement is that the Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with the agenda, updated agenda, which was approved on Monday morning. And now the sitting is adjourned. Thank you.